I'm not a storyteller, but I do tell stories through song. And tonight, with the theme being freedom, Nancy had asked me to play this song called Down by the Glenside. And it's about Ireland trying to gain its freedom. But I thought you should have some background on Ireland. I have a passion for it, the music, the culture, um, and the history. So we're going to start all the way back to 8000 BC. The first people arrived to Ireland, and they were hunters and gatherers. In 4000 BC, people arrived as farmers, and agriculture began with livestock and planting of crops. And then in 500 BC, the Celts came, and there were tribes of people, the Celts were, who moved from Central Europe to Ireland. And they really had a huge influence on the culture, the language, and the art. And a lot of that is still present today. And you'll see a lot of it with the Celtic knotwork, you know, uh, on clothing and in artwork. So after Christ was born, Ireland started a society in the first 3 centuries. There were clans scattered around Ireland. They had property and they had a chieftain that ruled that property. But there was one main ruler called the Ardri, and that's a high king. And he reigned from Tara, which is right over here north of Dublin. They say that the first Ardri was named Cormac MacArt, but because Ireland had the oral tradition, it's hard to say if it's legend or really a historical fact. Then in the 5th century, St. Patrick was there. He had been captured by Irish pirates and held captive in Ireland, and he was a shepherd. And after he escaped and returned home, he became a priest and later a Catholic bishop. And he loved the Irish people, so he returned to Ireland in 423 to convert the pagans to Catholicism. And through the 5th through the 7th centuries, it was a time of peace. Christianity was growing, and there was a lot of education, learning, and art. Then in the 8th century, here come the Vikings. They came in their longboats because they could travel up rivers, and they actually came through the River Liffey in Ireland. And the Vikings didn't, let's say, overrule Ireland, but they did plunder and pillage, mostly the monasteries, because that's where all the riches were held. But they melded into the society. They took on the culture of the Irish and learned the Irish Gaelic language and became Irish themselves. But then the 12th century, we have the Norman invasion. The Normans were Vikings who had moved to northern France, and now they have invaded Ireland. But with their invasion, they built huge castles and manors that are still standing today. And they had to fight for property against England. But England overruled, and that was King Henry II. He said, I am now the ruler of Ireland, but he didn't do too much to the Irish people at this time. But in the 14th century, King Edward II had something to say, and he created the Statutes of Kilkenny. Now, the English were still Catholic at this time, so they were in peace about religion, but these statutes pretty much segregated the Irish from the English. So if the Irish wanted to talk to the English, they had to speak in English, of course. If there were English people attending Mass in a particular church, the Irish were not allowed in. And one fact that I found very interesting is the Irish bards and minstrels were no longer hired to do their thing because the English thought they were spies. Then we come to the 16th century and the Tudor conquest. King Henry VIII, we all know, had 6 wives, and he was Catholic until he wanted to divorce his first wife, and he became Protestant. And at that time, he said, I am the full ruler of the earth. And the Pope no longer had any political say. So he established the Protestant church in Ireland, but it only diminished the Catholic faith because they continued to practice. And the only way it was diminished was that no more monasteries could be built. And they started making the priests pay rent, and they did that in the way of cattle. So things weren't too bad yet. But then Queen Elizabeth comes, and she has more to say. And actually, at that point, the Irish were persecuted, and really had a struggle because the Protestant church was fully enacted and imposed onto the Irish people. And lands were taken, and the Irish couldn't speak their own language any longer. They couldn't practice the religion, and they couldn't educate their children. But the Irish are pretty strong-willed, and they found ways to do these things. They would have hedgerow masses wherever they could find a flat stone or in a cave. They would have a mass, and they would have people standing guard to make sure the English weren't around the corner. They also had hedgerow schools so that the children could be educated. And the Gaeltacht is still a major Irish-speaking part of Ireland. And the English didn't invade that area as much as they did the eastern coast because the land there was so rocky, it wasn't fertile enough to do much with. Now, those were the Irish peasants who couldn't use their language and practice their faith, but they were Irish Anglo or Anglo-Irish, the wealthy, who also wanted to continue practicing the the Catholicism. And so I was just in Ireland a couple months ago, and I went to the Malahide Castle, which is just northeast of Dublin, and went on that tour. And they were talking about the Talbot family. The King of England had placed them at the Malahide Castle to, keep everybody in line in that area. And for 800 years, the Talbot family always had someone in that castle, which was just crazy, amazing to think that long one family could reign. But during that oppression of not being able to practice their Catholic faith, they built a tunnel underneath the castle that ran all the way to the forest, so that if the priest was in the castle when English arrived, they would escape through the tunnel. They also, in the oak room, they call it, beautiful, beautiful wooden oak with carvings, beautiful, beautiful art. And there was a wall that was large enough for the priest to keep his vestments and his chalice and all the things he needed to say Mass, and large enough for him just in case the English arrived before he could get to the tunnel. And so they would put him in there, close the door, lock it, and then put a tapestry over the door so that the English didn't even know that this priest hole even existed. Now, the English ruled Ireland through the 20th century. They took their land. They are now tenants paying rent. And during the famine, the Great Famine, those who couldn't pay their rent were kicked out of their homes, and the homes were destroyed. And they also had to pay taxes on their homes. And the more windows a house had, the higher the taxes. So the Irish decided they're going to fight back, and the risings began in 1641, but unsuccessfully. Then in 1790, in America, the Fenian Brotherhood was established, and they were collecting weapons and money to send back to Ireland so that the Irish could fight for home rule. In 1798, there was the Irish United Rebellion, and the French did help support them. The Irish wanted to have the same democracy that the new America had and the French had. But again, they lost. And there were some other, rebellions here and there, but the next one was actually the Fenian Rising in 1867. And it wasn't organized enough. There were too many groups of rebels fighting throughout the country. There wasn't one strong force to overtake England. And then in 1916 was the Easter Rising. A lot of people are familiar with that. Fighting began Easter Monday and continued for 6 days. And it was organized by 3 groups of people in Dublin: the Irish Volunteers, the Irish Citizens Army, and Cumann na mBan, which is Irish for the Women's Council. And together, they fought hard, so hard, for Ireland's freedom, but they also failed. And the leaders of that rising were imprisoned and then executed. The song that I'm going to sing, and you won't be able to hear the dulcimer, was written by Peter Kearney in 1916. And the song is about the Fenian men who did that fighting 50 years earlier in 1867. The story begins with a man walking down a lane, and without this woman knowing, on the other side of the hedgerow, he stops and listens because she's singing about that Fenian Rising. So although you can't hear it, but maybe you can, I have an instrumental break that opens up her story. And then when her story ends, I play the instrumental break again. And the final verse, that man reflects on what the Irish did to try to gain their freedom. Down by the glenside.
'Twas down by the glenside I met an old woman, a-plucking young nettles, nor saw I was coming. I listened a while to the song she was humming. Glory, oh, to the bold Fenian men. 'Twas 50 long years since I saw the moon beaming on strong manly forms and on eyes with hope gleaming. I see them again, sure through all my daydreaming. Glory, oh, to Their marching and drilling awoke in the glenside, sound awesome and thrilling. They loved poor old Ireland, and to die they were willing. Glory, oh, glory, oh, to the bold Fenian men. Some died by the glenside, some died mid the stranger, and wise men have told us their cause was a failure. But they stood by old Ireland, and they never feared danger. Glory, oh, to the bold Fenian men. I passed on my way, God be praised that I met her, be lifelong or short, I will never forget her. We may have great men, but we'll never have better. Glory, oh, to the bold Fenian men.
So back to gaining that freedom. In 1919, the Irish War of Independence began, and it lasted for 2 years. But England was getting tired, wasting time and money on this war. And there were so many Irish at that time who were against British rule that they just let the war filter out. And they created a treaty which separated Ireland into the north and the south. Northern Ireland was divided into 6 counties, and the Irish Free State was made into 26 counties. Now, from 1922 to 1923, there was an Irish Civil War. So there were some people on one side that accepted the treaty established by England, and the others who said, we want more say in our government than what England's giving us. So the Civil War continued, but it fizzled out and became guerrilla warfare scattered around the island and never came to anything. Then in 1937, the Irish Free State adopted a new constitution, and the southern part of Ireland was now called the Republic of Ireland, and in Irish Gaelic, Éire. And can you believe this? Not until 1949, 800 years of being controlled by England, Ireland finally had a full break from England. The Irish are very resilient and stubborn and strong-minded, but they finally won their freedom. Thank you.